There are moments in life that look ordinary on the surface but are anything except ordinary. Moments when nothing dramatic happens, no lightning, no epiphany, no breakdown. Yet internally, something moves. Something rearranges itself. Something wakes up. And the moment you clicked on this video was one of those moments. Not because the algorithm pushed it, not because you were curious, but because your consciousness did something extremely rare. It stepped out of one timeline and entered another. Most people will never feel that shift. Most will never notice when it happens. Most will keep walking through their lives as if they're repeating the same script, unaware that the universe quietly reorganizes around them every time they cross a threshold. But you sensed it. Even if you didn't have words for it, you felt it in your body. A subtle pulling sensation, a strange internal alignment, a deep click behind the scenes. Something in you recognized that you were no longer moving through life the same way you were yesterday, or even an hour ago. This isn't metaphoric. This is not symbolic. This is not poetic spirituality. This is psychological, neurological, and metaphysical physics happening in real time. Because every human being lives inside a timeline, a trajectory shaped by identity, perception, emotional memory, micro-decisions, patterns, and subconscious defaults. And timeline shifts occur when something interrupts the momentum of who you were long enough for a new version of you to take command. Most people require a crisis. Others need loss. Some need an awakening moment of exhaustion. And a select few, very few, shift simply by becoming aware of the shift. That's you. If you're watching this, it means one thing. Your consciousness just elevated itself past the version of you that was operating your life until now. Something in your internal architecture said, I don't fit myself anymore. And the moment that realization appears, even faintly, your old timeline loses authority. Let me make this clearer. There are two versions of you. The one shaped by your past, the one shaped by your awareness. And these two versions do not walk the same path. Your past self timeline is predictable, familiar, heavy. It contains the same reactions, the same emotional loops, the same relationships, the same outcomes, the same fears, the same inner narration. Your awareness self-timeline is nonlinear. It accelerates change. It dissolves patterns. It reorganizes reality around a new internal center of gravity. Most people never enter that second timeline, but you just did. And here's how I know. Because the moment consciousness jumps timelines, three things always happen. 1. Your perception becomes strangely wide. You see yourself more clearly. You see your patterns from above, like someone pulled you a few inches out of the old you. 2. The old emotional weight no longer feels like you. It feels like residue, something you carried for so long you forgot it wasn't part of your identity. 3. You can't go back. Even if the external world looks the same, the internal world is not. And your reality must eventually match your consciousness. You felt at least one of these, didn't you? Maybe all three. That's why this message found you now, not sooner, not later. Because you're standing at the threshold moment, the exact psychological coordinate where one timeline ends and another begins. And once you understand what caused the jump, you can choose the direction it moves next. Today, I'm going to show you what the shift is, what triggered it, how to stabilize it, and how to consciously walk into the version of reality that has been waiting for you to catch up. But first, you need to understand something that very few people ever realize. A timeline isn't a path. It's a state of consciousness. As your consciousness changes, your life reorganizes around the new signal you emit. You don't follow a timeline. You generate it. And the moment your awareness reaches a higher state, the moment you stop running on the mental autopilot you've lived in for years, your old timeline can no longer sustain itself. That's what's happening inside you right now. You're not losing control. You're regaining it. You're not breaking down. You're breaking orbit. You didn't accidentally land here. You were pulled here by the version of yourself that is finally ready to take the lead. Now, we go deeper. Because once a timeline shift begins, you must learn what to do with it. There are moments in life that look ordinary on the surface but are anything except ordinary. Moments when nothing dramatic happens, no lightning, no epiphany, no breakdown, Yet internally, something moves. Something rearranges itself. Something wakes up. And the moment you clicked on this video was one of those moments. Not because the algorithm pushed it, not because you were curious, but because your consciousness did something extremely rare. It stepped out of one timeline and entered another. Most people will never feel that shift. Most will never notice when it happens. Most will keep walking through their lives as if they're repeating the same script, unaware that the universe quietly reorganizes around them every time they cross a threshold. But you sensed it. Even if you didn't have words for it, you felt it in your body. A subtle pulling sensation, a strange internal alignment, a deep click behind the scenes. Something in you recognized that you were no longer moving through life the same way you were yesterday, or even an hour ago. This isn't metaphoric. This is not symbolic. This is not poetic spirituality. This is psychological, neurological, and metaphysical physics happening in real time. Because every human being lives inside a timeline, a trajectory shaped by identity, perception, emotional memory, micro-decisions, patterns, and subconscious defaults. And timeline shifts occur when something interrupts the momentum of who you were long enough for a new version of you to take command. Most people require a crisis. Others need loss. Some need an awakening moment of exhaustion. And a select few, very few, shift simply by becoming aware of the shift. That's you. If you're watching this, it means one thing. Your consciousness just elevated itself past the version of you that was operating your life until now. Something in your internal architecture said, I don't fit myself anymore. And the moment that realization appears, even faintly, your old timeline loses authority. Let me make this clearer. There are two versions of you. The one shaped by your past, the one shaped by your awareness. And these two versions do not walk the same path. Your past self timeline is predictable, familiar, heavy. It contains the same reactions, the same emotional loops, the same relationships, the same outcomes, the same fears, the same inner narration. Your awareness self timeline is non-linear. It accelerates change. It dissolves patterns. It reorganizes reality around a new internal center of gravity. Most people never enter that second timeline. But you just did. And here's how I know. Because the moment consciousness jumps timelines, three things always happen. 1. Your perception becomes strangely wide. You see yourself more clearly. You see your patterns from above, like someone pulled you a few inches out of the old you. 2. The old emotional weight no longer feels like you. It feels like residue, something you carried for so long you forgot it wasn't part of your identity. 3. You can't go back. Even if the external world looks the same, the internal world is not. And your reality must eventually match your consciousness. You felt at least one of these, didn't you? Maybe all three. That's why this message found you now, not sooner, not later. Because you're standing at the threshold moment, the exact psychological coordinate where one timeline ends and another begins. And once you understand what caused the jump, you can choose the direction it moves next. Today, I'm going to show you what the shift is, what triggered it, how to stabilize it, and how to consciously walk into the version of reality that has been waiting for you to catch up. But first, you need to understand something that very few people ever realize. A timeline isn't a path. It's a state of consciousness. As your consciousness changes, your life reorganizes around the new signal you emit. You don't follow a timeline. You generate it. And the moment your awareness reaches a higher state, the moment you stop running on the mental autopilot you've lived in for years, your old timeline can no longer sustain itself. That's what's happening inside you right now. You're not losing control. You're regaining it. You're not breaking down. You're breaking orbit. You didn't accidentally land here. You were pulled here by the version of yourself that is finally ready to take the lead. Now we go deeper. Because once a timeline shift begins, you must learn what to do with it. Every timeline jump begins with a moment you don't recognize until much later. A moment that feels ordinary on the surface but seismic beneath it. For you, that moment already happened. It might have been subtle. A sudden discomfort with your own habits. A sentence you couldn't finish because it didn't feel like you. A conversation that exposed how outdated your reactions were. A wave of clarity that arrived out of nowhere. A strange emotional dissonance that made no logical sense. A slight internal rebellion against who you've been. But whatever form it took, the structure is always the same. A fracture appears in the self you've been maintaining for years. A crack in the identity field. A divergence in perception. A glitch in the narrative. A moment where something inside you whispers, "This isn't who I am anymore." That whisper is the beginning of the jump. And here's the strange part. Most people misinterpret that moment as a sign that something is wrong. They call it burnout. They call it misalignment. They call it anxiety. They call it confusion. They call it losing themselves. But the truth is far more dramatic. That moment is the death of an outdated timeline. Let's break this open with clarity. Identity has an expiration date. Not because it stops functioning, but because you outgrow the psychological architecture that once kept you stable. When a version of you becomes too small for your awareness, it begins to collapse internally before anything collapses externally. You start feeling an inexplicable heaviness, an irritation with your own patterns, a boredom with your own personality, a discomfort with old dynamics, a resistance to repeating old behaviors, a strange internal pull towards something undefined. This is not dysfunction. This is expansion. Your consciousness is pushing against a container that can no longer hold it. And when an identity can no longer contain your awareness, you are forced out of it, even if you don't yet know where you're heading. That displacement is the beginning of a new timeline. When the old identity begins collapsing, the mind does what minds always do. It tries to protect the old version of you. It tries to preserve the familiar timeline. It tries to maintain predictability. So your thoughts start recycling. Why do I feel like this? What's happening to me? Why am I so disconnected? What's wrong with me? Why can't I be like I used to be? But these questions don't arise because you're breaking down. They arise because you're breaking out. The mind is trying to hold you inside a timeline that no longer fits. This is why you feel internal resistance. One part of you feels pulled forward. Another part tries to anchor you backward. And the tension between these two forces creates the sensation of disorientation. But pay attention. Disorientation is not confusion. It is recalibration. It is the internal signal that the old timeline is losing authority. Here is the moment every timeline jump shares, the moment of divergence. Awareness steps out of the loop. This can happen in a split second, a second of stillness, a moment where you feel strangely detached from your own behavior, a moment where you see your pattern instead of being inside it, a moment where you feel like an observer instead of a participant, a moment where you become aware of your own narrative as if it belonged to someone else. When this happens, something extraordinary occurs. You are no longer locked inside the old identity. You are looking at it from the outside, and the instant awareness exits the loop begins to break. This is the purest form of a timeline jump. The moment you observe the version of yourself you used to be, you stop being it. That's the moment where you diverge. Not emotionally, not philosophically, not spiritually, neurologically. Your brain shifts from identity enactment to identity observation. And once you observe an identity, you are no longer operating from it. This is why the old patterns suddenly felt foreign to you. They weren't bad habits. They belonged to a timeline you were already stepping out of. People think timeline jumps are mental. They aren't. They're energetic and emotional. Your internal emotional resonance shifts, and the old emotional signature no longer matches who you're becoming. You might have felt a calm without explanation, a grief without a story, an excitement without a plan, a detachment from old desires, a sudden lack of interest in old goals, a deep craving for something you can't describe. This is the emotional field adjusting to the new timeline. Emotion moves first, identity moves second, reality moves last. You've already completed the first shift. That's why you're able to hear this message. Your emotional frequency already left the old timeline behind. This is the part that confuses people the most. When you shift timelines, the old timeline begins pushing you out. People fall away. Opportunities dissolve. Old relationships feel out of sync. Old habits feel heavy. Old roles feel wrong. Old environments feel misaligned. Old versions of you feel impossible to maintain. This isn't rejection, it's release. The old timeline cannot hold a consciousness that no longer matches it. So everything in that timeline begins to fade. Not because you failed the timeline, but because you outgrew it. Once the separation occurs, the new timeline becomes perceptible, but not yet visible. It feels like a subtle pull, a faint direction, a quiet calling, a new rhythm, a different inner tempo, a growing sense of inevitability. You can't describe it. You can't articulate it. You can't explain it to anyone. But it is unmistakably real. Your future timeline is already interacting with you at the level of perception. This is why intuition becomes louder. This is why synchronicities increase. This is why you feel more yourself in moments that surprise you. This is why old fears suddenly feel illogical. This is why old limitations feel almost laughable. Your internal compass has been recalibrated. You're not walking toward the new timeline. You're being pulled by it. You can never go back. This is the most important part of the jump. Once awareness has expanded beyond an identity, that identity cannot retake control. You can feel the old timeline trying to pull you into its familiar gravity, but it can't. Not anymore. Because now you see it. And what you see, you can change. What you observe, you can step out of. What you become conscious of, you cannot unknow. This is the point where the old reality dissolves. Not because you destroyed it, but because it no longer has authority over you. Your consciousness has already moved on, and your life is now adjusting to follow it. Every timeline shift begins internally long before it becomes visible externally. But the moment consciousness expands beyond an old identity, perception reorganizes itself. Not gradually, not slowly, but abruptly, like the snapping of a thread you didn't even know was holding your world together. Let's break down what actually happens at the level of perception, energetics, and cognition the moment your consciousness jumps timelines. Most people don't realize how much of their perception is shaped by fear, monitoring, self-correction, and subconscious self-management. A timeline shift begins the moment those filters loosen, even slightly. When you're still inside the old timeline, everything is interpreted through, am I doing this right? Will this cause problems? Will they approve? Does this match who I'm supposed to be? Am I safe doing this? These are not conscious questions. They are automatic filters that shape your entire interpretation of the world. But when consciousness moves into a higher timeline, something radical happens. Your perception detaches from self-protection. Suddenly the world looks different. Not because the world changed, but because you're no longer filtering it through the architecture of fear. This is why you recently started feeling less triggered, less defensive, less reactive, less self-conscious, less concerned with being understood. This isn't maturity. This is a perceptual recalibration. Your consciousness stopped scanning for danger. It started scanning for truth. Every old identity relies on justification to stay alive. You must justify your choices, your preferences, your boundaries, your direction, even your existence, to yourself and to others. Justification is the glue that holds a small identity together. But when you shift timelines, justification dissolves. You don't feel the need to explain why you feel what you feel. You don't need approval to move in the direction that calls you. You don't negotiate with your intuition. You don't shrink your truth to protect old dynamics. You don't seek permission to follow your internal compass. This is one of the most unmistakable signs of a timeline jump. Your truth becomes self-validating. Not because you're stubborn, not because you're rebellious, but because the new timeline doesn't require external validation to remain stable. The new version of you doesn't need justification, it simply is. In the old timeline, every desire is followed by a reflexive internal check. How? When? What if it doesn't work? What if something goes wrong? What if I fail? What if it's too late? These are the micro-patterns that anchor you into an outdated timeline. They create internal friction. They keep your awareness looping. They reduce possibility to probability. They shrink your reality to something calculable. But when consciousness jumps timelines, the internal friction disappears. Not because obstacles vanish, but because your awareness stops feeding them. You feel a strange ease, almost an unfamiliar inner quiet. A goal arises, and there is no internal argument. A desire emerges, and there is no resistance. A possibility appears, and you simply feel its direction. This shift is profound. You are no longer thinking from limitation. You are perceiving from alignment. In the old timeline, intuition is something you question. In the new timeline, intuition is something you follow. The difference is subtle, but powerful. Old timeline intuition. A whisper you evaluate. New timeline intuition. A directive you trust. After the jump, intuition becomes clearer, faster, and more precise because your awareness is no longer tangled in self-doubt. You start receiving instant clarity, instant warnings, instant resonance, instant redirections, instant recognition of what aligns and what doesn't. Nothing is calculated. Everything is known. This is not spiritual awakening. It is perceptual coherence. Your consciousness is finally vibrating at the frequency of your own truth. You'll notice something else. Minor choices feel significant, not heavy, significant. Because when you shift timelines, choices are no longer practical. They are energetic. You feel the difference between a yes that expands you and a yes that drains you, a no that frees you and a no that binds you. This is because, in the new timeline, every decision is a declaration of identity. Your choices no longer maintain an old self. They generate the new one. This is why you feel repelled by certain environments, repulsed by certain conversations, disconnected from certain people, uninterested in certain ambitions, unable to tolerate certain dynamics. It is not emotional. It is energetic. You're not rejecting these things. You're no longer a match for them. Synchronicity is not magic. It's coherence. When your inner reality shifts, your external reality begins to echo the new structure. So you might have noticed repeating numbers, odd coincidences, unexpected opportunities, strange, perfect timing events, moments of déjà vu, words or symbols showing up repeatedly, people appearing right when you think of them, answers showing up the moment you ask the question internally. This is because your consciousness is no longer fragmented. When your internal narrative becomes cohesive, external reality begins mirroring that coherence. You do not create synchronicity. You align with it. Synchronicity is simply a symptom of internal order. In the old timeline, life feels adversarial. You're always preparing for impact, always waiting for the next problem, always anticipating the next loss, always calculating the next risk, always guarding the next vulnerability. Even when things are good, you feel tension beneath the surface. But in the new timeline, that tension disappears. Life doesn't feel easier. It feels less oppositional. Not because you gained control, but because you stopped fighting yourself. Your internal world is no longer in resistance. Your external world no longer reflects resistance back at you. This is why you've recently felt more supported, more connected, more fluid, more guided, more capable, more open, more attuned. Reality didn't soften. You did. And when you soften, reality responds. Perhaps the most subtle, yet most powerful, perceptual shift is in the tone of your self-talk. In the old timeline, your inner voice manages you, corrects you, warns you, limits you, berates you, polices you, reminds you of who you're supposed to be. But in the new timeline, your inner voice becomes a collaborator, a translator, a guide, a companion, a truth teller, a compass, a mirror. Not because you became positive, but because the old identity no longer dominates your internal narrative. This is the moment when you start to feel like, I'm finally speaking from myself, not at myself. That is the unmistakable signal that the timeline shift has anchored internally. A timeline shift doesn't fully complete when you feel different. It completes when your identity architecture rewires itself around the new perception. This is the phase most people misunderstand. They think the shift is emotional. They think it's mental. They think it's energetic. They think it's behavioral. In reality, a true timeline transition is identity-level restructuring. Your sense of who I am undergoes a silent reorganization. Your consciousness updates the blueprint from which you operate. Let's break down what actually happens during this anchoring phase. Every identity is built from narratives, things you tell yourself about yourself. I'm the kind of person who I always struggle with. I never succeed at. I usually mess up. I'm afraid of. I can't handle. I'm not good at. These narratives are not stories. They are anchors. They keep you locked into the timeline that fits them. When consciousness jumps timelines, these anchors loosen. Not because you overcome them, but because they no longer match your frequency. You'll notice something subtle. You begin forgetting your old limitations, not fighting them, not analyzing them, not healing them, not reframing them, simply forgetting them. They stop feeling relevant. They stop feeling personal. They stop feeling like yours. It is one of the clearest signs that the old identity is dissolving. Every timeline has its own set of recurring issues, the same cycles of stress, conflict, doubt, or internal noise. But after a shift, you'll feel a strange disconnection from problems that once consumed you. It's not numbness. It's not avoidance. It's not denial. It's not suppression. It's irrelevance. Your consciousness has outgrown the frequency that sustains those problems. You don't resonate with the emotional charge anymore. You don't replay it in your mind. You don't argue with yourself about it. You don't search for solutions obsessively. You don't attach meaning to it. You don't build identity from it. That's because problems require participation. When you stop contributing energy, they collapse. This is why your life recently started feeling quieter, even in situations that once triggered you. The new timeline is replacing the emotional architecture of the old one. In the old timeline, behavior is based on memory. You respond the same way you always have. You think in patterns you learned years ago. You anticipate outcomes that once happened. You project past experiences onto current situations. You behave from habit rather than truth. But the new timeline breaks that loop. Your actions emerge from awareness, not memory, not conditioning, not past data, not habitual reactions. Your responses feel fresh, spontaneous, aligned with what's happening right now, not what happened before. This shift is subtle at first, then unmistakable. You begin to realize, I'm not acting like who I used to be, not because you're trying, but because the old self doesn't have control anymore. Your emotions stop behaving the way they used to. You don't spiral as easily. You don't catastrophize. You don't collapse into old wounds. You don't cling to old emotional loops. You don't dramatize internal friction. You don't personalize external events. Instead, emotions become information rather than identity. You don't become the feeling. You observe the feeling. And because of this, emotions pass through you faster. You no longer store emotional residue in your system. You don't defend your pain. You don't rehearse negativity. You don't internalize turbulence. This is the emotional signature of a new timeline. Clarity without resistance. In the old timeline, many of your choices were compensatory. You chose based on avoiding failure, controlling outcomes, earning approval, protecting your image, preventing loss, maintaining stability, keeping others comfortable, managing potential conflict. These choices weren't aligned with your truth. They were attempts to compensate for unresolved fears. But in a higher timeline, decisions arise differently. You choose from expansion, not because it's bold, not because it's risky, not because it's impressive, but because it matches your internal frequency. You choose what feels lighter, truer, cleaner, more coherent, more aligned, more expansive. Your life stops shrinking around fear and starts expanding around truth. This is the recalibration of identity. This is the moment people rarely talk about. The quiet internal recognition that feels like, I'm finally seeing myself accurately. I'm not pretending anymore. I'm not managing myself anymore. I'm not performing an identity. I'm not negotiating with who I am. I'm returning to myself. This recognition isn't dramatic. It's subtle, grounded, calm, like meeting the version of you that has been waiting behind the noise. Your identity stops being something you maintain. It becomes something you inhabit. This is the deepest sign that the timeline shift is stabilizing. Once the internal shift stabilizes, the external world begins its response. People behave differently around you. Opportunities appear that were invisible before. Old relationships lose their gravitational pull. New connections form with ease. Your environment feels less resistant. Your momentum increases without force. Your path becomes clearer. This is not manifestation. This is alignment. Reality reorganizes itself around your new frequency. The internal shift has anchored. The external shift has begun. Finally, the most profound, and often the most startling, realization. Once consciousness upgrades to a higher timeline, the old timeline becomes inaccessible. Not because you're resisting it, not because you're fighting it, not because you're avoiding it, but because you no longer vibrate at the frequency that sustains it. Like trying to step into clothes you've outgrown. They simply don't fit anymore. People from the old timeline may try to pull you back. Your old fears may attempt to resurface. Your old identity may try to anchor itself. But none of it will stick. The shift is permanent. Your consciousness has crossed a threshold, and nothing in your life will behave the way it used to. Most people think a timeline shift is like flipping a switch. One moment you're in your old life, the next you're in a new one. But that's not how higher consciousness works. A timeline reveals itself gradually, in layers, as your awareness becomes capable of perceiving it. In this phase, reality feels different, not dramatically, but noticeably. Let's break down the exact mechanisms of this revelation. The first indicator is not visual. It's not emotional. It's not cognitive. It's energetic. You start feeling the air differently. Conversations sound clearer. Interactions feel lighter. Tension dissipates faster. You sense more spaciousness in your mind. You feel less compressed inside your body. You notice fewer internal spikes of urgency. This is the new timeline coming online. Your nervous system relaxes because it no longer needs to anticipate danger from the old version of reality. You don't silence your mind. Your mind becomes silent. Not empty, not numb, not dissociated. Just quiet. The subtle buzzing, the micro self-monitoring, the internal commentary, the habit of watching yourself think, the constant pressure to correct yourself, the low-grade forecasting, the anticipatory tension, all of it weakens. This is not self-control. This is self-liberation. Your mind stops working against you because the old threat architecture is gone. In the old timeline, intuition felt like static, weak, distant, unreliable, difficult to trust. But during a timeline shift, intuition becomes louder, cleaner, and unmistakably precise. You start knowing things without effort. You sense timing more accurately. You feel red flags before the mind identifies them. You feel openings before opportunities become visible. You anticipate emotional shifts in others. You navigate choices with unusual clarity. This clarity is not magic. It's coherence. When your internal frequency stabilizes, your intuitive field becomes fully accessible. You're not guessing, you're perceiving. One of the most striking signs of a new timeline is that other people begin treating you in ways that feel inconsistent with how you used to be treated. They trust you faster. They soften around you. They speak more openly. They calibrate less. They share more warmth. They sense your presence rather than your pressure. It feels like the world is giving you a different role. That's because it is. People respond to your field, not your personality, not your behavior, not your words. Your field changed, so their behavior changes automatically. This is how external reality begins aligning with the new timeline. In the old timeline, your life had repeating points of friction. The same types of conflicts, the same mistakes, the same internal drops, the same fears, the same doubts, the same emotional spirals, the same energetic crashes. But after the shift, they simply stop happening. Not because you learned a technique, not because you forced better habits, not because you fought your reactions. They stop because the internal frequency that produced them is gone. Your life doesn't require the same lessons anymore. The loops collapse because you're no longer feeding them. This is one of the most noticeable signs. Your sense of timing changes. You move slower internally, but faster externally. Your actions feel calm. Your momentum feels clean. You're less rushed. You're less scattered. You're less tangled in your mind. Yet everything progresses more smoothly. You accomplish more with less effort. You make decisions more quickly. You lose less energy to doubt. You stop negotiating with yourself. It's like walking the same road in a different gravity. The resistance drops. As the new timeline stabilizes, your perception sharpens. You detect motivations instantly. You read emotional states without judgment. You sense when something is off. You recognize opportunities faster. You pick up on subtleties you used to miss. You feel the truth before you rationalize it. This is not hypervigilance. It's clarity. Your consciousness becomes less clouded by fear, so your pattern recognition becomes extraordinary. The world becomes easier to navigate because you're no longer navigating blindfolded by old conditioning. Nothing dramatic, just subtle anomalies. Someone says exactly what you were thinking. A problem resolves itself before you intervene. A conversation syncs perfectly with a decision you were about to make. An opportunity appears at unusual timing. People show up the moment you think of them. Your day aligns in strangely precise ways. These are not coincidences. They are signs that the old timeline is dissolving, and the new one is synchronizing around your frequency. The glitches are the transitional fingerprints of a reality updating itself. In the old timeline, your desires felt distant, your goals felt heavy, your progress felt slow. But now, something shifts. The future feels near, like it's approaching you rather than you chasing it. This is the gravitational signature of alignment. Your timeline has stopped resisting your direction. The path ahead is no longer built from struggle. It's built from coherence. You've crossed the threshold. The new timeline isn't forming, it's revealing. A timeline shift is not complete the moment it begins. It becomes real when it stabilizes, when your consciousness stops slipping back into the old frequency and starts operating naturally from the new one. Most people feel the shift, but they don't anchor it. And if you don't anchor it, your nervous system drags you back to the timeline that feels familiar, even if it's miserable. This part of the journey is about stabilization, the process of locking into the new version of you so your external world can finally reorganize itself around your upgraded frequency. Let's break down the anchoring process into its essential components. Every shift has two versions of you, the one you're becoming and the one you used to be. The old identity will question everything. Why do you feel so calm? Shouldn't you be stressed? Are you sure you're not making a mistake? Why aren't you overthinking? Why do you suddenly trust yourself? These are not real concerns. They are echoes. Echoes from the version of you the universe is trying to retire. If you engage with those echoes, the shift collapses. If you ignore them, the new timeline anchors. Your job during this phase is simple. Stop arguing with who you used to be. Let the old narrative die. When a timeline is shifting, the old emotional patterns don't disappear instantly. They discharge. You might randomly feel a sudden wave of sadness, a flash of insecurity, a brief spike of self-doubt, an urge to re-explain yourself, a moment of irrational nostalgia for your old struggles, or a sudden drop in energy for no obvious reason. This is normal. It's not regression, it's release. Emotions stored in the old timeline rise because they cannot survive in the new one. If you react to them, analyze them, dramatize them, or assume something is wrong, you reconnect with the old frequency. If you let them pass without attaching meaning, the new timeline stabilizes faster. You're not supposed to process these emotions. You're supposed to outgrow them. Every timeline has a neurological signature. In the old timeline, your baseline might have been mild hypervigilance, inner tension, self-correction, anticipatory fear, self-monitoring mental noise, constant internal commentary. In the new timeline, the baseline is different. Quiet mind, even breath, neutral presence, clean awareness, unforced confidence, lack of urgency, lack of self-surveillance. At first, this new baseline feels unfamiliar, almost suspiciously peaceful. Your nervous system will check. Is this safe? Can I trust this calm? Is something wrong? Am I missing something? This is not doubt. This is adaptation. You are calibrating to a frequency where peace is normal, not an anomaly. The new timeline anchors when peace stops feeling unusual. This is where most people unconsciously sabotage the shift. They try to live in a new timeline using behaviors from the old one. In the new timeline, you must choose as the new identity. You speak slower. You react later. You decide from clarity, not fear. You don't rush into explanations. You don't seek validation. You don't collapse into self-monitoring. You take silence as a default, not a threat. You let people show their energy before you respond to it. You choose environments that match your expansion instead of your old wounds. Anchoring requires behavioral alignment. A new timeline cannot stabilize around old habits. Every timeline shift comes with micro-tests. You may encounter someone from your past reaching out, a familiar insecurity resurfacing, an old temptation appearing, a situation that mirrors a previous wound, a moment where your old self would have collapsed, a choice that once felt impossible, but now feels neutral. These are not obstacles. They're checkpoints. Reality is asking, are you really operating from the new frequency, or are you momentarily visiting? Your response determines the lock-in. Pass the tests not by fighting, but by not contracting back into your old identity. Remain in the stillness of the new timeline. The shift holds. Some relationships, environments, and routines cannot exist in the new timeline. Not because you're too good for them, but because their frequency does not match your expanded state. You'll notice, some people stop contacting you. Some conversations feel impossible. Some old interests feel empty. Some habits feel foreign. Some environments feel dense or draining. Some dynamics collapse without conflict. Don't chase what collapses. What falls away was built for the version of you the universe is retiring. Let the shedding happen. It's not loss, it's alignment. The anchor point of the shift is this: when you no longer exit yourself, when you no longer monitor your tone, when you no longer rehearse your reactions, when you no longer anticipate judgment, when you no longer negotiate your worth, when you no longer shrink or contort to fit energy that isn't yours, when you no longer disconnect from your body during interactions, when you no longer observe yourself from the outside. This is the ultimate stabilization mechanism. Presence without self-surveillance. When you reach this state, the new timeline becomes irreversible, because the old version of you cannot exist in the absence of self-interference. Once the timeline anchors internally, the external world begins reorganizing with surprising speed. You may notice unexpected opportunities, new connections, old blockages dissolving, synchronicities increasing, doors opening effortlessly, better timing in everything, unusual flows of support, faster manifestations, greater ease in decision-making, and a sense that life is finally moving with you, not against you. This is not luck, it's resonance. Reality always reflects the timeline you're anchored to. You are no longer vibrating with your past, you're transmitting the future. This is the point where life begins accelerating in ways the old you was not capable of sustaining. The shift has completed its structural foundation. Now the transformation becomes visible. You've made it all the way here, not because you're curious, not because you're bored, not because this video sounded interesting, but because a deeper part of you recognizes truth when it hears it. What you're feeling right now, that quiet internal expansion, that strange clarity behind your awareness, that sense that something subtle just rewired itself, is not imagination. It's orientation. Your consciousness is stabilizing in a timeline your nervous system has never lived in before. And before you leave this video, you need to understand the single realization that makes this shift irreversible. You were never trapped by your circumstances. You were trapped by the version of yourself that kept interpreting them. This whole time, you thought life wasn't changing because life was stubborn. But reality was only reading one thing: the frequency of the observer you were being. And the moment you stopped monitoring yourself, the moment you stopped negotiating your worth, the moment you stopped calculating your every breath, you stepped out of the version of you that reality had been responding to for years. You didn't think positively. You didn't manifest. You didn't visualize. You switched identities. And the universe had no choice but to respond. Because reality does not mirror your desires. It mirrors your state. Here's the truth you were never taught. Your life does not change when you force different behaviors. Your life changes when you become someone who doesn't need to force anything. And that is the version of you that came online in this video. The version that doesn't over-explain, doesn't overreact, doesn't self-monitor, doesn't shrink, doesn't chase, doesn't anticipate failure, doesn't abandon itself under pressure, doesn't audit every word before speaking. This version of you belongs to a different timeline entirely. A timeline where your presence is clean, your awareness is grounded, your energy is unmistakably calm, and your identity is self-authored instead of fear-authored. But here's the part most people never understand. A new timeline doesn't begin when you understand it. It begins when you identify from it. Understanding is intellectual. Identity is generative. You can understand something and never live it. But you cannot identify with something without reality reorganizing around it. And right now, your identity has already shifted. Your mind is quieter. Your breath is lower. Your awareness is inside your body, instead of floating behind your eyes watching your life from a distance. You've stepped back into yourself. That is the entire secret. Not your curated persona. Not your self-managed behavior. Not the version of you shaped by fear of embarrassment or failure. The universe responds to the you who exists after the performance ends, after the pressure fades, after the monitoring stops. This is why your reality is already shifting. Because you're no longer inside the internal noise that used to define you. You're inside presence. And presence is the only state in which your true timeline can finally reveal itself. There's a moment in every transformation when going back becomes impossible. Not because you shouldn't, but because the old version of you can no longer survive the level of clarity you're operating at now. You just crossed that moment. From here forward, you will notice things that you used to tolerate now feel too small. People who once intimidated you now feel transparent. Situations that once drained you now reveal themselves as misalignments. Habits that once felt comfortable now feel incompatible. This is not you becoming arrogant. This is you becoming accurate. Accuracy is what happens when self-monitoring dissolves and you see your life as it truly is, not as your fear edited it to be. You're not leveling up. You're returning to the baseline your soul was designed to operate from. Not effort, not hustle, not spiritual theatrics, just integrity. Integrity between what you feel, what you know, what you choose, and who you're becoming. If you maintain that alignment, your timeline will not just shift, it will accelerate. Faster opportunities, cleaner intuition, sharper decisions, higher quality connections, less resistance, less noise, more clarity, more inevitability. This is the architecture of a consciousness that has stepped out of self-surveillance and into self-sovereignty. You feel it. You know it. Your body knows it. Your awareness knows it. You didn't learn something today. You became someone. And as long as you honor this identity, as long as you choose presence over performance, clarity over fear, embodiment over self-monitoring, your reality will keep shifting in ways the old you was never capable of receiving. Because now you're not living from the outside in. You're living from the inside out. And that is the moment your true timeline begins.